How do we know that the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6, 1 through 4 are indeed angels that came down to boink human women and not a reference to, say, like the line of Seth or to kings that were behaving wickedly? Let's look at the evidence. The text in question reads, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." So there are two classifications of beings here. We've got human beings that increased in number, and daughters were born to those human beings. It says Adam in Hebrew, meaning actual physical human beings. It doesn't give a separate classification as like good or bad human beings, just human beings in general. Then it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful. So the question is, who are the sons of God? Does this show up anywhere else in the Old Testament? It does actually. So let's look at those passages before we go any further. Now, in the book of Job, we read, "There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." And in chapter 2, 1, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came along with them to present himself before the Lord. So, something interesting here, it seems like Satan is a member of the sons of God, the beni Elohim, which means it probably isn't referring to anybody human. That kind of rules out the line of Seth, and that rules out kings that were behaving wickedly. There's a bit of a hidden gem in Deuteronomy 32:8 where it says, "When the Most High apportioned the nations, he divided humankind. He fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the gods." And this is really interesting. This plays into who the sons of God were. They were literally the sons of the God. They're described as Elohim also elsewhere in the text, like in Psalm 82. They're described as Elohim, the sons of God. But what does that have to do with the nations? Well, according to legend, both Canaanite legend and others, there is a special son of God, an angel or judge that is sitting over each individual nation, and they are in charge of their own people group, much like Yahweh was in charge of his people group. And so the sons of God not only were angels that were boinking human women, but their role specifically was to be enacting justice and righteousness and looking out for the individual people groups of the earth. And in fact, this translation says the number of the gods, but in Hebrew it literally says the number of the sons of God, the beni Elohim again. So the sons of God were sitting over top of the nations theoretically. Now, in the post-exilic age, we have many texts that reference these giant offsprings of angels and humans. One from the Deuterocanonical book, Baruch, says that vast and endless, high and immeasurable, in it were born the giants, renowned at first, huge in stature, skilled in war. These God did not choose, nor did he give them the way of understanding. There are giants mentioned in the Bible, and we're going to keep going. There's more references. The same Nephilim that are mentioned in Genesis 6 and also Baruch as being giants we see in Numbers 13:33 when they're scoping out the land. There we saw the Nephilim. The Anakites come from the Nephilim. And to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers. So we seemed to them. Because these giants were theoretically giant because they are of divine status, much like the demigod Gilgamesh was part god, part human, and because he was part god, he was much bigger than the other human beings. And in another deuterocanonical book, Sirach, it states, "In an assembly of sinners a fire is kindled, and in a disobedient nation wrath has blazed up. He did not forgive the ancient giants who revolted in their might. He did not spare the neighbors of Lot, whom he loathed on account of their arrogance. He showed no pity to the doomed nation." So this is really interesting because it's a direct reference to what we see in the book of Genesis. One, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and one, the sin of the Watchers, as they are titled in Enoch, which we'll see next. In the book of Enoch we read, "And the angels and the sons of heaven saw them and desired them, and they said to one another, Come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the children of men, and let us beget for ourselves children. And Shemaiah, who is the leader, said, to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And the book of Enoch goes on in great detail to tell the entire narrative of the watchers who were supposed to be looking over the nations. We read in Deuteronomy 32:8, but actually didn't look over the nations. They slept with the women and created these human angel hybrids. And take note of this, because this name comes up again as the offspring, or sorry, the ancestor of King Og of Bashan. That's listed in Deuteronomy 3. He's the last of the giants, theoretically, that survived the flood. And in rabbinic literature, he is a direct descendant of this particular angel. They actually think they knew which angel begat this giant named King Og. Now, I know some of you are saying, yes, but Enoch is not a canonical book. We shouldn't be looking at Enoch. But it's important to recognize that Enoch is quoted directly in 2 Peter and in Jude. We read in 2 Peter 2:4-10, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of the deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment. And if he did not spare the ancient world, even though he saved Noah." And then he goes on to tell about the flood of Noah, and then also Sodom and Gomorrah. He goes through the wicked people in chronological order in the book of Genesis. And the very first one that we see are the angels who sinned, and they are in hell committed to chains, which, guess what, is not recorded in the Bible. That is recorded in the book of Enoch and in some of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. So the author here is specifically referencing, invoking the book of Enoch as though it is fact. And in the book of Jude, we read in verse 6, "And the angels who did not keep their own position, but deserted their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains in deepest darkness for the judgment of the great day." And then he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, so on and so forth, and various sexual sins, because the New Testament authors knew the narrative from Genesis, but they are also familiar and agreed with the additional narrative that we read in the book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's look at some of those. In the Damascus document, which we find in the Dead Sea, it says, "For having walked in stubbornness of their hearts, the watchers of the heavens fell. On account of it, they were caught, for they did not follow the precepts of God. And their sons, whose height was like that of cedars, and whose bodies were like mountains, fell." So even in the Dead Sea community, there seems to be agreement that the narrative of the watchers is in fact accurate. And in the Testament of Naphtali, which we find in the Dead Sea, we read, "All that ye become not as Sodom, which changed order of its nature, in like manner also the watchers changed the order of their nature, whom also the Lord cursed at the flood for their sakes, made desolate the earth, that it should be uninhabited and fruitless." So Naphtali mentions the fall of the watchers as well. And of course, we read in the book of Jubilees, chapter 20, "For the seed of Canaan will be rooted out of the land. And he told them of the judgment of the giants and the judgment of the Sodomites." Again, retelling the judgment of the wicked sexual unions of the book of Genesis, which included the giants that came from the illicit offspring of the angels and the human women. Now, there's a lot more that can be said on this topic, but these videos can only be 10 minutes in length. So I'll end with a quote from my favorite Genesis scholar, Klaus Westermann, who wrote after we had discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls and had time to study the Ugaritic and the Canaanite religions, in which we learn who the beni Elohim are, because the beni Elohim are named many times in the Canaanite, especially the Ugaritic texts. Klaus Westermann says, way back in the 70s, the chapter that asked, "Are the beni Elohim to be regarded as human or non-human beings," can be considered closed. The number of voices supporting the view that they are human has diminished. One senses among the few who still adhere to this view a defensive attitude conditioned consciously or unconsciously by a mentality that demands that the explanation that it is a simple, matter-of-fact reference to non-humans must be rejected unconditionally. No modern scholars accept the view that the sons of God were in fact human beings. All modern scholarships, with very, very few exceptions, accept that this is a reference to supernatural human beings having sex with human women.